All right, so hello and welcome to the AS and A-level Python series. And in this episode, we are going to be looking at scope. All right, so scope in Python, or generally scope in programming, basically, it refers to the visibility and accessibility, right, as it were, of variables, functions, and so forth and so on. But for the most part, really, in Python, we are going to be concerned with variable visibility, which is basically the scope that we're going to be looking at. So there's actually two ways with which you can enforce, or rather two keywords that pertain to variable scope. And also so it's just variable scope as it were. So there's the global keyword and there's also the non-local keyword. But I don't think we are going to be looking at the non-local keyword in detail, if I should say. And because what I've come to realize is that for this course, you actually don't need to make use of non-local keyword as it were, because we rarely, or if ever, use closures when we implement our solutions. Remember, we're only limited to console applications as it were. So throughout my time implementing solutions for this particular course, I've never used the non-local keyword as it were. But I think maybe I'm just going to demonstrate it for educational purposes. But of course, you actually don't need to know it for you to be able to take the exam as it were. So maybe let's start with the definition of scope. So you say that scope refers to the visibility slash accessibility of variables as it were. So we are just going to limit it to variables in this particular episode. So the first keyword that we are going to be looking at is the global keyword. And maybe what we can do is let's go ahead and define a function called should we call it sum? Let's have a function called add2, right? Then this function is actually going to take two parameters, x and y. We are going to call them x and y. Then we can have a sum variable right here that's going to be equal to 0. Then inside of x and y, rather inside of the add2 function there, we can add the two parameters there. So that's x and y. Basically, we just return x and y as it were. So let's go ahead and do that. So we can return x and y. Then, maybe how about if we return sum is equal to x plus y, like that. Then return sum. Yeah. Then maybe what I can do in here is I can give sum a value of 45 right there. I think this is proper. Let's go ahead and see this in action. So we can go ahead and call add2 right here and supply 7 and 4 as it were. But before we do that, maybe let's actually go ahead and print sum is equal to 0. No, before we print sum, let's try and print sum here, so that we can see what's going on. Then we can later on print, rather return sum x plus y. Then should we make it return something? Let's just print sum, or I don't want it to return anything. Print sum there. Statement that by new line there is my comments. It's again supposed to be parentheses there. Alright, so here let's just go ahead and call add2 right here. So let me just clear out the console and run the script there. I'm supposed to have supplied those two positional arguments. Alright, maybe let's say 1 and 2 as positional arguments. And clear out the console and run it one more time. Okay, so we're getting another trace back here. Cannot access local variable somewhere it is not associated with a value. Right. So this error actually is going to show us the concept of scope, as it were. So you see that what's happening right here is that you would think, since we already have this variable called sum on line number 2 there, if we go ahead and try to print sum before even assigning a value to it on line number 5 there, we are trying to use sum. So you'd think that since we have sum going on line 2, we'd actually be able to print sum right there on line 5. But that's not going to be the case, because when you call sum in this particular function add2, it's essentially going to look for a variable called sum within it, is it? So any variable called sum inside of this add2 function should be declared inside of this function, as it were. So that's why we are getting that error right here, which says that cannot access a local variable sum where it is not associated with a value, is it? So it's simply telling us that we cannot print sum because it's not declared anywhere inside of this particular function, right? So this simply means that this function called add2, it does not even see this variable called sum that is on line 2 right there. So the way we can fix this is actually to make use of the global keyword in Python. So we can come here and call the global keyword, then say sum, right? So this time around, when we go ahead and run this script, you'd actually see that we get two outputs, as it were. So the first output on line on this one, this 45 right here, it's actually the Python interpreter making reference to the global variable called sum, which we declared at the top of this of the script right there on line 2. So when we say global sum on line 5, we are telling the Python interpreter that you should look for this sum variable outside of the scope of this particular function. So that's what's happening there. Then of course on line 7 there, we are declaring, or rather we are reassigning sum the value of 1 and 2 that we have going there on line 10. And you see that 1 and 2, they are actually arguments to the add2 function. So that's why we are getting 3 there. So that's how you can make use of the global keyword. So it's just a way of nudging the Python interpreter and telling that, hey, I want you to look for this variable inside this particular script, as it were. So it's actually very useful, especially if you have a lot of functions going on inside of your script and you want to make use of one variable across the entire script, is it? So you can just declare it as a global variable outside of any methods, then all the methods can then go ahead and access that. Then the other type of scope that I wanted to show you, but remember I said that this one, you will rarely use this one in when you are implementing your solutions for this particular course, but maybe just for let's just say for learning purposes rather, let's just go ahead and look at it, how you can make use of the non-local keyword, as it were. So let's go ahead and declare another function rather down here. So maybe let's say the section called using non-local. So maybe I'll just go ahead and write the script here, or write a few lines, then I'll explain what's going to happen. So let's define a function, we call it counter. Then inside of this function, we will have a count variable, which we can assign a value of 0. Then let's have an inner function rather, and that's called increment here. Then increment is going to make use of the non-local variable called count, and we are going to increment plus equal to 1, basically increment count by 1. Then this function, that is this inner function, is going to return the value of count, and the outer function is going to return the inner function basically, so it's going to return increment there, right? Then we'll come out of the nested functions there. Then we can maybe let's just create an instance of that function, that function counter. Then here we are going to print counter, rather the counter instance there that we're going on. Then we're also going to print count here. So generally we're just calling the counter function is instance 2 times on line 24 and line 25 there. So let's go ahead and run the script and I'll explain what's going on here. So run scope and you see that we have 1, then we have 2. Maybe let me just put a demarcation here, right here, and just put a print, then just print some lines there. And they clear the console and run the script one more time. Alright, so this is what's happening here. You see that in the first instance it's going to print 1, then in the next instance it's going to print 2. So walking you through the code here, you see that on line 13 we have the function definition for the counter function there. Then on line 14 we are instantiating, rather we are declaring a variable called count and setting it to 0. Then on line 16 we have the inner function is it way called increment, and it's now making a non-local reference to this count variable. So in as much as it is kind of similar to the global keyword, this non-local just tells this function that refer to this count variable outside of this particular function, but still within the counter function there. So that's where the difference is. And this particular syntax or this particular implementation, it actually sits in something called closures in Python. So closures are just a way of giving function some memory, as it were. So you see that the first time around we increment counter, rather we increment count by 1 and we return count. So what's going to happen is that this increment function, the first time around, it is going to have a variable of what? A value of 1 assigned to count, and it's going to print 1. Then when you call again counter the next time around, it's going to preserve this function, or rather it's going to preserve this value of 1, so that when you increment when you return increment, it's going to remember that it was incremented before, so it's going to give this value of 2. So that is what happened right there. Is it? So essentially this is typically used in stateful management when we're doing Python, where we use closures, as it were. But then again, you don't really need to worry about the non-local keyword if you are taking this course, because you never use closures, as it were. But I just thought I'll put it out there so that you know how to use the non-local keyword, just in case you wanted to explore your Python programming, as it were. But otherwise, we're just concerned with the use of the global keyword. So yeah, I think that's just about it for this episode. I'll see you guys in the next one.